about it. And it gave me time to make the first 2 shows a little bit better, and that was our goal. So
it would be nice.
Up next on Inside the SCCA, Inside the Stewards Room. And welcome to Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Bielanski. We're here for another Wednesday night of podcasting fun and frivolity. My guest this evening, an old friend of mine. Should I call you an old friend or a longtime friend, or would you be an old, longtime friend, Stu?
I guess all of the above.
Stu and I have known each other since, I'm going to say 1999 or so. That's when I moved to New York and started hanging out with the New York region folks. And Stu, when we met, you were the New York region flag chief.
Yes.
And then you decided to move to Florida, something I will still never forgive you for. And then
there are others that say the same thing.
And then you came up to me and said, I think you should be the flag chief. And I said, you're out of your ever-living mind. And then you said to me, there's no one else who wants to do it. And I said, what makes you think I want to do it? And then I think it came down to, you're the only one who I can talk into doing it.
But, you know, it was the same baton transfer from our dear friend G-Dub to me.
Right.
He begged me multiple times, and,
right.
You know, he's like, all right, I really had it. You really have to take this. So
yeah.
It's a succession of those.
It seems that seems to be the way a lot of positions exchange hands within the club. And but actually, I learned so much, and that was kind of my entry into becoming part of more than just showing up on race weekends and playing with cars. I was always one of those people that would say to myself, if I don't participate, I give up my forfeit my pass to bitch about things. So and I decided that, okay, well, I am in a position where I had a little time, and Alex, our kid, wasn't born yet, so we did it, and I'm actually glad I did. I learned a lot, and it was a good time. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Stu, you've watched the show. You know how I'm going to start this. How did you get mixed up in this great sport that we love?
The first race I attended was the 1969 Trenton 300 USAC race at the Trenton Fairgrounds. My dad took me to. And from then on, my dad was taking me to Watkins Glen, Bridgehampton, all those fun places. We went to the last Trans Am at Bridgehampton, 1970.
Okay.
In college at Adelphi University on Long Island, I was a sportscaster at the radio station. So I started getting press passes to Pocono and Lime Rock primarily. And then after college, I was at Lime Rock one day on the hill overlooking Station 5. And I said, I need something more. Those people in white look like they're having a lot of fun. Walked up to the fence, asked them, and they said, where do you live? I said, Long Island. They said, okay, get in touch with New York region. So made a phone call to Henrik Zamota, who was the RE at the time.
Legendary name in New York region and in the Northeast.
Yeah. And joined in January of 83.
Okay.
And then, as soon as the snows had melted, started flagging in, I guess, May of 83.
Okay. So if you went to your first race in 69 and you were in college, right?
No, I was 10 years old.
Okay. Because I was going to say to myself, I know you're a little older than me, but I can't imagine. If you're 20 years older than me, you're looking really good, Stu. So, all right, that makes me feel a little bit better. You're only 10 years older than I am.
Yeah, the late 70s was my college years.
Got it. Okay. I say, man, I got a lot of work to do if I'm going to look that good when I'm 70. So that makes me feel better. So, so your first race was, let me guess, Bridgehampton as an SCCA-er.
Actually, in the early 70s, our family doctor raced Formula B for EMRA.
Yeah.
At Bridgehampton.
Okay.
So we would go out there to watch him race, and he was also the doctor for EMRA.
Of course.
So when there were any incidents, a couple of times he had to pull off and jump out of his race car to tend to a crashed driver.
Yeah.
So we went out there for that, and then of course the SCCA races.
Right.
And I have the dubious distinction of having been the flag chief at the last event ever, SCCA event at Bridgehampton.
Wow.
And the chief steward for the last SCCA event at Palm Beach International Raceway.
Nice. Nice, I guess. Nice.
So people tell me to stay away from their racetracks unless they get shut down.
When was the last race at Bridgehampton?
The last SCCA was May of 97.
Okay, so literally 2 years before I moved to New York, which makes me sad because the whole time I lived on Long Island and in New York, we heard they're going to try to bring back Bridgehampton. Bridgehampton's not dead yet. There's a new owner group that's going to try to do Bridgehampton. And, man, they broke our heart and gave us hope back and forth for, what was that, almost 20 years. Maybe 10 years. Before it was finally pretty obvious it was never coming back. So, that was one of those wonderful racetracks that I wished I would have had a chance to work at. And I did go racing at Palm Beach International back when it was called Moroso. So I do have a little bit of time there before you screwed that one up too, Stu. But yeah, it's some good stuff. So, and then you and I met in I don't think I came. I just started coming out because the first year in New York, I was just trying to figure out how to live in New York. You know, that's a thing. When you come to New York as an outsider, it's a whole crazy place to learn and live. So I didn't do much racing in '99. I think I might have come at the end of '99 for one race up at Lime Rock. And then I started coming out a lot in 2000. And I became a regular in 2000. And then I think it was 2002. Is that when 2002, 2003, when did you move to Florida?
We moved in March of 2005.
Okay. So, yeah, that was, yeah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. So, but, and now and when you went to Florida, were you in a steward in training at that point, or had you not even started that?
No, I flagged down here for a bunch of years.
Okay.
And around the end of 2015, one of the stewards, and I don't even remember who it was, asked me if I'd be interested in joining the stewards program, that They needed more stewards, and now we need that need has gotten even greater. And so in the beginning of 2016, I went into the SIT Steward in Training program.
Right. So let's talk about. So we're on today. We're going to talk about, for those of you who might not have figured it out or didn't see the headline before they clicked, because they just click blindly into our show because it's so popular that they'll watch any episode. But I asked you to come on so we could talk a little bit about stewarding and the steward program. And I think for a lot of drivers, first of all, no driver ever wants to talk to a steward, because there's always this negative connotation to talk to steward. I would encourage all the drivers out there to find a steward throughout the weekend and chat with them, because they're just like us. They're car people. They enjoy having it. They enjoy being at the racetrack. And there's this misconception and that all stewards are retired drivers. Drivers who can't drive anymore become stewards. If I recall, Stu, did you ever drive?
No, never. The timing and the money were never right.
Yep. I know how that goes. You don't have to be I want to say washed up, a retired driver, a driver who can't do it anymore. As a matter of fact, I would encourage current drivers to get into the steward program and come out on weekends they're not driving. And if your region is desperate enough for stewards, they might even let you be a steward on weekends that you are driving. You can maybe do that, especially once you get through the steward and training program. I think it's kind of hard to do it when you're training, but there might be opportunities for that. I know we have one steward out here on the West Coast that does that. But so, Stu, there's lots of different stewards, right? Yeah. So which let's go through them. I mean, I guess the one people most identify with is the chief steward. What is the role of the chief steward?
The chief steward is essentially responsible, has the ultimate responsibility for the conduct of the event, for everything that goes on there, all of the worker/volunteer specialties and specialty chiefs report to the chief steward. All the other stewards, except for the stewards of the meeting, which we'll get into, all the other stewards report to the chief steward. And the chief steward, as I said, has the ultimate responsibility that the event is conducted safely and in accordance with the GCR, the general competition rules. Right.
And what a lot of people don't realize, the chief steward isn't actually running the individual races, right?
Right. There are several assistant chief stewards, ACS. The operating stewards are the ones that are up in the tower, right, whether it's actually a tower or a trailer.
Sure.
And the operating stewards are the ones that will operate each session. They'll rotate and take turns. Usually for each race session, you'll have both an operating steward and a backup sitting next to the race control communicator. So when a call comes in over the net, the radio net, and there's some kind of incident, although it's the communicator that's talking to the flag station, and if you're monitoring the race control net, and all drivers or teams should be,
right, when they
that
can,
communicator doesn't have any authority. They an experienced communicator can ask the right questions to the corner, exactly where is the car, is there a track blockage, etc. But it's the operating steward sitting right next to the communicator that makes the decision. Okay, let's go full course yellow. Very often turn to the emergency vehicle dispatcher, which is in most cases these days, especially a track person. Back in the day up at Lime Rock and some of the other tracks in the Northeast, we and our good friend Stu Cowitt used to be the EV dispatcher at the SCCA events. But now it's pretty much, I think all the tracks have their own EV dispatcher. Turn to them and say, and we love doing this at Sebring, can you get that under a local yellow, especially if it's just a flat toe? And in most cases, unless it's in a really bad spot, they'll say, yeah. So we don't have to go full course yellow in that case. Meanwhile, say a call comes in, there's been a pass under yellow. The backup steward sitting there also starts filling out the paperwork. If there's been 2 witnesses and all, the backup steward is filling out the chief steward's action for that penalty.
Right.
So those are the folks, and then if something more major happens, say there's a lightning shutdown, we have to, lightning in the area, we have to black flag, shut down. Then it becomes, we all turn to the chief steward, who gets with the race chair and says, okay, we're running out of time. We're not going to have enough time. What do you want to do? So it's the chief and the race chair that then say, okay, let's shorten each of the remaining sessions once we know how much time is left, et cetera. Those are those kind of decision makers.
Sure. There's also a tech steward in many races. What is the tech steward responsible for?
The tech steward at events where you have the luxury these days of having enough stewards and there's a dedicated tech steward, will be over in the impound and tech area. And when any tech issues come up, this car is underweight, or there's a possible issue with a restrictor plate, or protest is filed regarding any of the technical rules, it's the tech steward that will work with the scrutineers to get that figured out, to see if it's in compliance or not. And then the tech steward will take care of that paperwork, whether it's typically in that case, it's a chief steward's action for a penalty. The car is underweight. We've waited 3 times going in both directions, and they need to be penalized.
Oftentimes, at least in some of the races I get involved with, the tech steward also ends up being the, tech steward, would you please talk to the car 25 after the race about something they've done during the race? Because they all end up in impound and in the end anyway. So the tech steward gets to have that conversation on if there's not a dedicated steward to that for that job. So that's another one of those situations. And then there's some races have a black flag steward as well, right?
Yeah, and in most cases, it's more common, at least in these parts, based upon our staffing. It's much more common for us to have an SOC, steward of the course, used to be called, and sometimes still black flag steward.
Right.
That's at Pit Central. There's been contact between 2 cars. SOC, talk to those 2, see if you can get it figured out. More common to have that even than the tech steward, because very often the chief steward will be hanging out around impound at post-race, so they can do that. And a lot of times what happens is the 2 cars will come in, we'll talk to each of them and go, no, it was, I didn't give him as much room as I should have. And talk to the other guy and he says, yeah, I maybe didn't give him as much room as we should have. And neither of them crashed out. There was just some metal to metal, which is supposed to be investigated per the GCR. And the SOC will call up to race control and they'll be like, okay, no action needed. On the other hand, if we talk to the 2 drivers and one of them says, he rammed me in the rear and he's a menace and this and that. Okay, probably needs to be investigated further. The SOC at that point won't do that. They'll again radio that to race control and the operating stewards, and they'll decide, okay, if it's clear cut enough, we'll write a chief steward's action and assess the penalty. But very often with that, and these days with drivers supposed to have video in their cars, we refer that to the stewards of the meeting, the SOM, and they can actually sit down with each driver, have them fill out a witness statement, review their videos over and over, and some folks even have front and rear facing,
right,
which really makes things a lot easier. And then the SOM make the decision, does this warrant a penalty against one or sometimes even both or multiple drivers or not?
Right. And where does the court come in?
Well, that is the court, the
Okay.
SOM. There's a chairman SOM, CSOM. The chairman and his stewards of the meeting report directly. Their responsibility is to Topeka. It is not to the organizer
Right.
of that. It's not to the region. It's not to the other stewards. They are an independent group. For example, if the operating steward assesses a penalty for a cold-in pass under yellow, or the tech steward assesses a penalty, drivers can then protest that, and it's the independent stewards of the meeting or court that can then hear that and essentially, overrule the other stewards or uphold their ruling. So that's why they have to act completely independently as observers of the event and as the independent court.
Right. I don't think a lot of people realize that, that the stewards of the event are not technically, while they're probably members of your region or local regions around the area, they're not working on behalf of the event organizers for this event. They're the just like when you go to a baseball game, the umpires aren't hired by, the Yankees and the Red Sox. They're hired by Major League Baseball, and the same is the case in football and all that kind of stuff. And while the stewards aren't hired, I'm sure you'd like to be hired, but really you're working for SCCA National, and your responsibility as stewards is to make sure that big thick, well, most people don't realize anymore that it's a big thick book, because no one gets a book anymore for the most part. But when I started out, the GCR was the size of a small city phone book. It's the responsibility of the stewards to make sure that the races are operated in accordance with all of that stuff in that big thick book. So when you get mad at your stewards, don't get mad at your local regions, because they're not responsible for those decisions. Even though the folks you might see every weekend at that same racetrack, and they're probably regional members, but and that's I think that's an important distinction to make. Because you don't want the people who are responsible for taking your money to be also responsible for deciding whether you're legal or not. So
the GCR specifies that for the majors and super tours, the chairman of the SOM must come from out of region.
Right.
For regionals, it's preferred.
Sure.
But with these days, and again, depending on where in the country you are and all, it can be pretty tough to do that. So although it's preferred that it be from out of region, that's not always the case.
Right. Well, and super tours are a different animal altogether, because they travel the race, the higher echelon of the race operating group travels, and they're paid for by SCCA, or at least they're assigned by SCCA. I don't know if they get paid or not. They may just get volunteers who just get travel taken care of for them. So don't get me in trouble, anybody, for that. But and the nice part about that is they have two teams that work for two teams of It's a race director, and I think the chief steward, right? Those are the two people that come to each race?
No, it's the race director and the clerk of the course.
Clerk of the course, that's exactly right.
The clerk of the course will be in race control.
Right.
Basically standing near the operating stewards, because, again, you want operators who, for the most part, have local track knowledge.
Yep.
But the clerk of the course will be ensuring that the operation of those sessions is, as you said, standardized.
Right.
The race director is the one who, in most cases, is going to be assessing initial penalties.
Right.
But the chairman SOM will be from out of region, but it doesn't have to be the same at every one of the, say, East Coast Super Tours.
Right.
I know that this coming January, we will have, there's much of the same staffing when we have our back-to-back Homestead Majors and Sebring Super Tour.
Right.
So it'll be the same chairman, Russ Gardner, coming down from DC region as chairman. And then his stewards of the meeting will be just some of the local stewards.
Sure. Yeah, and the goal with the Super Tour is to have all 10 weekends operate kind of under the same standard, and anyone who's done a lot of racing at many tracks around the country knows that depending on who is running each event, while they're still following the GCR, there's different ways that every region does things, and to have the same upper echelon staff going to these races tries to make it an even playing field regardless of which Super Tour you go to, and that's kind of the way that the thought process is behind that.
If Formula One can't even get it exactly even from event to event, then we can only try.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dean. No, you're right.
Not his fault.
No, it's not. But you're right. It's we that's the big spotlight. The whole world sees when it doesn't go maybe as smoothly as possible, and it happens at the Formula One level. It happens at IndyCar. You and I have both worked a lot of IndyCar events, a lot of IMSA events, and I've never worked a NASCAR event, but I've been to a bunch of NASCAR events. And, even at that top level things, there's always questions. Things aren't always interpreted the exact same way from one instance to another. And while you might think that it would be a 1-for-1 situation, no two incidents are exactly the same. Right, Stu?
Right.
How do you deal with that when you have to deal with a situation and the driver said, well, how come it's not the same as it was last time?
Thankfully, I haven't had that come up too often, but, again, it's every situation has its nuance.
Right.
These days, having video is really so helpful. And that's one thing I get jealous of when I see, the Pro Series where they have their wall of cameras.
Right.
Or even certain tracks in the U.S., like Road America, having its wall of cameras, and Indy. Down here, Sebring, 3.7 mile, the long course. You can't really see too much from up in the tower. You can see a little bit of it.
Right.
But, when an incident happens and drivers can bring us their videos, and then we can start parsing through it and say, okay, look, this one hit that one, and the corner report was slightly different because, in the blink of an eye, when an incident happens, the flaggers, and even back in the day when we'd have 5 or 6 people on a corner for a regional or a national, it was tough then. Now with, say 2 to 3 flaggers, it's so easy to miss something or say, I think car 1 hit car 2, and then you look at the video and it's the other way around. But
right.
Video is definitely making the steward's job somewhat easier, and you definitely feel like it's fairer because there's real evidence to look at. And there's been a number of cases where I'll say to one of the drivers, "Is it okay if we show your video to the other guy, because he has it in his mind that you hit him. They're like, yeah, sure. And you show it to the other driver and they're like, ooh.
Yeah. Do you have to ask permission to do that? Because I believe that in the rules that the video is actually the drivers are required to allow you to do that, right?
No, they do not have to allow their video to be seen by the other driver.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever had it where they say, no, you can't see it.
Right.
But, we always ask and we're supposed to ask.
Huh. Interesting. Were you a steward before video was required?
Yeah. The Super Tours just started requiring it. Is it, I think,
2 years ago? Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. And now 23 this year was the first year that it's required at the regional level.
Right.
And, it's taken us a good part of the year to not have drivers saying, oh, really? It is? We're like,
yeah.
Okay, now you've been warned. Next event when we see you, you better have it.
Right.
But there's still a fair amount of, oh, I forgot to turn it on. Oh, I didn't put the card in.
Right.
Those kind of things. So yeah, I started, as I said, in the stewards program 2016.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was some of, just going by, talking to the drivers and talking to the flaggers and trying to then put it all together.
Yeah, I would remember working big weekends where there was a half a dozen people on a flag station, like at the runoffs. Something would happen, and there'd be 6 of us with 6 different opinions on what they saw, what we saw. And if you go to you talk to a criminal investigator, who has to interview witnesses of a crime. And, people are very bad reporters when you're in the heat of the moment and stuff's happening fast, and nothing happens faster than at a racetrack. And, everybody sees usually something slightly different. So not surprising to me at all that that's a difficult process to put in. How often are you asked to look into a situation, and in the end, you just can't make a determination who's at fault?
That's not uncommon. We had that happen at last November's Turkey Trot at Sebring, which is our big Thanksgiving weekend bash that's coming up again. Bash is probably appropriate word. But on the first lap of, I think it was Saturday's Spec Miata race, surprise.
Yeah.
Way too many Miatas tried to occupy the same bit of space in turn 3. And I think there was a total of about 8 cars that weren't, most of them continued, but there was various, hits and spins, and then most of them drove off. And we went through everybody's video, or as many as has had it, which was most of them. And we were like, we really can't attribute blame. There was a little bobble by this one and a little bobble by that one, and they got together, and then that got them into them, and he probably shouldn't have done that. And just not enough fault by any one driver to assess a penalty.
Yeah. Nobody's happy when that happens. Well, except for the guy who knows he was wrong. Because it's my experience in the amount of driving that I've done that while I might not admit it, I always knew when I was wrong. So, what do you enjoy about being a steward?
I enjoy most of the aspects, going through a weekend, whether it's a busy weekend with a number of incidents or a quiet weekend, just getting the event through to the end, trying to have everybody, the participants and all, be happy, as happy as could be, feel like they were treated fairly. Yeah, and knowing that I was a real part of conducting a successful SCCA event.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that like to make the joke, including a lot of the SCCA flaggers, that there's, way too many stewards. These days, that's much less so than it used to be. But, without the stewards and the various roles, operating the session and enforcing the rules, the SCCA experience, I think, would be, more akin to some of the other clubs that you hear various, oh, they don't conduct things fairly. There's favoritism. There's this and that. That's really not an allegation that I've rarely heard, if ever, alleged against when an SCCA is run. Oh, there's been any favoritism. Sometimes that gets mentioned in the rules making process, but that's not the stewards or the at-event experience.
What type of person? Because I've met stewards who I said to myself, this person shouldn't be a steward. Because there is a skill in dealing with people that's really important to stewarding. It's not necessarily hard to necessarily interpret the rule book and say this is right or wrong. But when you got two people, or maybe even just one person who doesn't necessarily agree with what you're telling them, thinks they've been wrong, thinks the other person's, sometimes there's a fight or flight mechanism that people have when they've done something wrong or they're being questioned about something. And it takes a special type of person to be able to manage those situations. How do you find people to do that well?
It's not easy, and I think that may be one of the contributors to our staffing situation these days in the Stewards program. There's been a big effort, I know, in the years that I've been in the program to really have stewards who are, I'll use the term kindler, gentler kind of thing, but, to not have the argumentative types that there used to be many more of in the stewards program. I recall from all of my years of flagging and working race control up at Lime Rock, Bridgeend and all, where some of the stewards, as soon as a driver starts to push back verbally, the steward, they get there like, the cat arching its back and ready to pounce and want to, just get into an argument. And so, these days when I know there's been one or two people that have expressed somewhat of an interest, and, those of us stewards will talk and say, just not the right fit for, whereas maybe in years past they would have said, oh, they want to be in the stewards program, fine.
Right. Yeah, it's tough when you have a need to say no to somebody.
Yeah.
But I think it's worse for the program to have the wrong person in the program than to have more than enough people in the program. And I would probably say that for any specialty. It's hard sometimes when you've got someone who wants to do something and might not be the right fit for that job, especially considering they're not jobs, because we're all volunteers. It's hard to turn a volunteer away. You never want to do that, but sometimes, and in some of our specialties, it's a safety consideration too. We've got some folks who put themselves in a tough situation or a potentially dangerous situation. And if the people on the team aren't prepared properly for that and might not have the right skill set for it, it's hard to put those folks on the bench, but we have to do it sometimes. And the best part is we can find someone else to someplace else for those folks. There's usually a fit for everyone somewhere, but maybe not it's where they want to be. So, and that's a great skill for race directors and folks within the region to be able to tell someone, we really like you, but we need you to be somewhere else. We really could use you here, and find a way to make it feel like they're getting a promotion or something better than just telling them you suck at this and we need you to do something else. Because I've seen people try to do that too, and that doesn't end well. What would you tell someone who's thinking about maybe just trying it out once?
Absolutely. In fact, the first time that I considered the Stewards program was a couple of years after we moved down to Florida. And I asked one of the stewards, I said, can I shadow you for the day? Instead of being out on a corner, I'd like to see what the Stewards program is about. He's like, yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
I think he was the chief steward that weekend. And it gave me a good feel for it. And then at that point, I said, yeah, I think I'm still happy out on a corner. So then it was several years later when I was asked, and I was, yeah, I think I've had enough of standing on corners, although I still, as you know, flag for the pro events.
Sure.
But yeah, we're always happy to have somebody really for any of the SCCA specialties. If somebody wants to try it out, and you mentioned earlier on about people doing more than just one thing. That we had I had a friend up in New York region, Johannes Kraus. He raced his rabbit.
Yeah.
And whenever he wasn't racing his rabbit, he was out with us flagging.
Yeah.
And the same kind of thing really can work, as you mentioned before, for stewarding, particularly for guys that run, for example, majors. And if they're just going to be at home on weekends when their region is running regionals,
sure,
we could really use their help, and vice versa. Even guys that run and ladies that run regionals, we could use their help. And there's enough, especially in a part of the country like Florida, where we have races pretty much almost every month of the year, that when you're not in the car, the club could really use your help. And maybe it's the Steward program, or maybe it's one of the tech or one of the other specialties.
Real quick before we wrap it up, the Steward training program, there's tools now for that, and some of them are online, right? Because there's a big push within the club to do these online modules. And as I understand it, there's some Steward training modules that you can do when you're not even at the racetrack, right?
I haven't heard that there are any video. The first one that they rolled out is for F&C,
right?
Formal training. I have not heard that there are any video modules for stewarding.
Okay.
The SIT program is, for the most part, coming out to the track. You work a weekend with F&C, you work a day, I think, with tech and with each of the other specialties. So if you have no background in that, you get exposed to those.
Right.
And then you work with the various licensed stewards at the event until they see that you're comfortable, and okay, you sit in the chair, you're going to operate the session, and I'm going to stand right over you. Lisa Noble, when she was in the SIT program, came down to the Homestead Majors one year, and she operated one of the races, and I was standing by her, so if the hoop hit the fan and she wasn't sure what to do, or what any SIT, they can get the guidance. And once they've shown that they've got a basic grasp of things, then they're upgraded to the regional steward's license.
Right. So if anybody's questioning whether to do it, come on out and shadow for a weekend and kind of get your feet, dip your little toe in the water to see what it's all about.
Yeah, the staffing is definitely down in every one of the volunteer specialties, but this past weekend at Sebring, we had 3 operating stewards to cover not only the race control room, but SOC at Pit Central. So, for the whole 2 days, we were just going back and forth, and it gets tough. So the more, the merrier.
That's right. And if you want to spend some time, some of your winter time, if you're up north and it's going to be winter in January, and you want to get your racing fix, there's 2 back-to-back weekends. You can go do Homestead, and then the following weekend is Sebring. And if you want to come, check that out, or even be a flagger or whatever, find the Central Florida region do both of those races? No.
No, Homestead is my region, Florida region.
Okay.
And Sebring CFR.
And Sebring is CFR, but it's a great vacation to get away from the snow up north and come and a lot of flaggers and workers come down for those races. And if you come to Sebring, I'll be there, and I'll stop at the worker party and share a beverage with everybody. So, Stu, thank you.
My pleasure.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of the voodoo science behind being a steward. Hopefully people realize that if they just have some questions, if they have a problem, these folks are not there to be your enemies. They can actually help you through it. And it's better to come and ask the questions than have to be in a situation where you're in trouble with the stewards. So
right.
It's good to have you on here and have that discussion. So
thanks, Brian. All
right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network so you won't miss an episode. It would also be great if you were to subscribe and like and all that other cool, smash the like button and all those other cool things that I'm supposed to say and sound hip. But when I say them, they don't make me sound very hip. At least that's what my kid tells me. Leave a message on social media. Find out who our next guest is. You can follow us on RacingWire Net on Twitter. You can also follow us on the Facebook pages. We're all over those as well. A new Inside the SCCA happens every Wednesday. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend and go play with cars.